Anyway, I'd had a bath. Morning was bright and beautiful, like 9 mornings out of 10 in the high desert country. We met the captain and turned the cattle over to him. We finally settled on $20 a head, which was a very good price at the time and place. First off, we rode into town. A girl spotted me and she pointed her finger at me and gasped and spoke excitedly to the girl with her. And then they both began to look at me and laugh. Orrin was puzzled because the girls always noticed him first and paid me no mind. Do you know those girls? Me? I never saw them before in my life. But it gave me a tip-off of what it was going to be like. That story must be all over Santa Fe by now. Before we reached La Fonda, we'd passed a dozen girls, and they all laughed or smiled at me. Tom, Sunday, and Orrin, they hadn't an idea of what was going on. La Fonda was cool and pleasant again, so we ordered wine and a meal. And the girl who took our order realized all of a sudden who I was, and she began to giggle. When she went out with our order, 2 or 3 girls came in from the kitchen to look at me. And picking up a glass of wine, I tried to appear worldly and mighty smug about it all. Fact was, I felt pretty foolish. Orrin was getting sore. He couldn't understand the sudden interest the girls were taking in me. He was curious and interested and kind of jealous all at once. The only thing I could do was stand my ground and wear it out or hightail it for the brush. Santa Fe was a small town, but it was a friendly town. Folks here wanted the good time that strangers brought. In those years, it was a town at the end of things, although it was old enough to have been a center of everything, and the girls loved a fandango and enjoyed the presence of the Americans. There was a cute little button of a Mexican girl, and every time I'd see her, she gave me a flashing glance out of those big dark eyes, and believe me, I'd get flustered. This one had a shape to take a man's eye, and every time she'd pass me on the streets, she'd give a little more swish to her skirts, and I figured we could get acquainted if I just knew how to go about it. Her name was Tina Fernandez. Night of the second day, there was a knock at the door, and when I opened it, Fedderson was standing there. "Mr. Pritts wants to see you. All of you. He wants to talk business." We looked at each other. Then Orrin got up to go. The rest of us followed him, and a Mexican standing at the bar turned his back on us. Anybody who was friendly to Jonathan Pritts would find few friends in Santa Fe. It wasn't just that which worried me. It was Orrin. Jonathan Pritts had 4 men outside the adobe where he lived, and a few others loafing near the corral. Through the bunkhouse door, I could see several men, all armed. "One thing you've got to watch, Tyrel," I told myself, "is a man with so many fighters around. He wouldn't have all those men unless he figured he'd need them." Roundtree glanced at me. He was a badger tough and coon smart. Suddenly paused on the porch and took out a cigar, and when he reached back and struck the match on his pants, 3 chairs creaked as men put their hands to their guns. Tom didn't let on he'd noticed, but there was a sly smile around his mouth. Laura came to meet us in a blue dress that brought out the blue in her eyes, so she looked like an angel. The way she offered both hands to Orrin and the way she looked at him, it was enough to make a man gag. Only Orrin wasn't gagging. He was looking at her like somebody had hit him with a fence post. Cap was uncommon sour, but Sunday, always a hand with the ladies, gave her a wide smile. Sometimes I thought it irritated him that Laura had chosen to fall for Orrin and not him. Her eyes looked past Orrin at me, and our minds were hitched to the same idea. We simply did not like each other. Jonathan Pritts entered wearing a preacher's coat and a collar that made you wonder whether he was going to offer prayer or sell you a gold brick. He passed around a box of cigars, and I was glad I didn't smoke. Orrin accepted a cigar, and after the slightest hesitation, Tom did too. "I don't smoke," I said. "Will you have a drink?" I don't drink, I said. Oren looked at me because I don't care for the stuff. Sometimes I drink with friends. You boys have done well with your cattle, Pritts said. And I like men with business minds. However, I'm wondering what you plan to do with the proceeds of your success. I can use men who want to invest business brains and capital, men who can start something and carry it through. Nobody said anything, and he brushed the ash from his cigar and studied the glowing end for a minute. There may be a little trouble at first. The people on the land are not Americans, and they may resent our moving in. Oren spoke slowly. Tyrel and me came west hunting land. We're looking for a good home. Good. New Mexico is now part of the United States, and it's time that we American citizens had the benefits. He drew deep on his cigar. The first comers will be the first served. The way it sounds, I said, you plan to shove out the first comers and move in yourself. Pritts was mad. He was not accustomed to straight talk, least of all for men like us. He said nothing for a moment, and Laura sat down near Oren, and I got a whiff of her perfume. The Mexicans have no rights, Pritts replied. The land belonged to us, free-born Americans, and if you come in with us now, you'll have shares in the company we are forming. We need a home for Ma, Oren said, and we do need land. If we get it this way, there'll be blood on it, I said. But first, we should get Mr. Pritts' proposition in writing, just what he has in mind and how he aims to settle up. That was Pa talking. As Pa always said, get it in writing, boy. A gentleman's word, Pritts replied stiffly, should be enough. I got up. I had no idea what the others figured to do and didn't much care. This sanctimonious old goat was figuring to steal land from folks who'd lived on it for years. A man who's talking of stealing land with guns, I said, is in no position to talk about himself as being a gentleman. Those people are American citizens now as much as you or me. Turning around, I started for the door, and Cap Roundtree was only a step behind me. Tom Sunday hesitated, being a polite man, but the four of us were four who worked hard and traveled together, so he followed us. Oren lagged a little, but he came. And Pritts yelled after us, his voice trembling as he was so mad. Remember this, those who aren't with me are against me. Ride out of town and don't come back. And none of us were greenhorns, and we knew those men on the porch weren't knitting, so we stopped. The four of us faced out in four directions. Mr. Pritts, I said, you've got mighty big ideas for such a small head. Don't you make trouble for us, or we'll run you back to the country they run you out of. He was coming after us, and he stopped in mid-stride. Stopped as though I'd hit him with my fist. Right then, I knew what I said was true. Somebody had run him out of somewhere. He was an arrogant man who fancied himself important, but mostly he carried it off. But now he was mad. We'll see about that, he shouted. Wilson, take them. Roundtree was facing the first man who started to get out of a chair, which was Wilson. And there was no mercy in old Cap. He just laid a gun barrel alongside of Wilson's head, and Wilson folded right back into his chair. The man facing Oren had a six-shooter in his stomach, and I was looking across a gun barrel at Pritts himself. Mr. Pritts, I said, you're a man who wants to move in on folks with guns. Now you just tell them to go ahead with what they've started, and you'll be dead on the floor by the time you've said it. Laura stared at me with such hatred as I've ever seen on a woman's face. There was a girl with a mighty big picture of her pa, and nobody who didn't see her pa the same way she did couldn't be anything but evil. And whoever she married was always going to play second fiddle to Jonathan Pritts. Pritts looked like he'd swallowed something that wasn't good for him. He looked at that Navy Colt, and he knew I was not fooling, and so did I. All right. He almost choked on it. You can go." We walked to our horses, and nobody talking. And when we were in our saddles, Orrin turned on me. "Damn you, Ty. You played hell. You, the same as called him a thief. That land belongs to Alvarado. We killed a lot of Higginses for less." That night, I slept mighty little, trying to figure it all out, if I'd done right. Anyway, I looked at it. I thought I'd done the right thing, and I didn't believe my liking for Drusilla had a thing to do with it, and believe me, I thought about that. And next morning, I saw Feddersen riding out of town with a pack of about 40 men, and Wilson was with them, only Wilson's hat wasn't setting right on the lump on his skull that Cap had given him. They rode out of town, headed northeast. About the time they cleared the last house, a Mexican boy mounted on a speedy-looking sorrel and took off for the hills, riding like the devil was on his tail. Looked to me like Don Luis had his own warning system, and he would be ready for Feddersen before he got there. Riding that fast, he wouldn't be riding far, so chances were a relay of horses were waiting to carry the word. Don Luis had a lot of them, lots of horses, and a good many friends. Orrin came out, stuffing his shirt into his pants. He looked mean as a bear with a sore tooth. "You had no call to jump Mr. Pritts like that." If he was an honest man, I'd have nothing to say. Orrin sat down. One thing a body could say for Orrin, he was a fair man. "Tyrel," he said at last, "you ought to think before you talk. I like that girl." Well, I felt mighty mean and low down. I set store by Orrin. Most ways, he was smarter than me. But about this Pritts affair, I figured he was wrong. "Orrin, I'm sorry. We never had much, you and me. But what we had honest. We want a home for Ma, but it wouldn't be a home she wants if it was bought with blood." "Well, damn it, Tyrel, you're right, of course. I just wish you hadn't been so rough on Mr. Pritts." "I'm sorry. It was me, not you. You ain't accountable for the brother you got. Tyrel, don't talk that way. Without you that day back home in Tennessee, I'd be buried, and nobody knows it better than me."